Welcome to TV Monaghan viewers. This is Seán Hillen at the National Library of Ireland Photographic Archive. The conflict killed about 4,000 people, more or less evenly, depending on, killed by whom. It's hard to argue who was, running what. But what I realised with a shock at one point, that every death that we heard of, we parsed it by not who these people were, but what they were. They were not a person, they were a thing. They were a provo or a soldier or a policeman. And I used to justify that to myself. I'd say, he's carrying a weapon and pointing it at us and prepared to use a weapon and, deserves what he gets. And I'm shocked that I used to feel like that, but I did feel like that. And I think that this is the labelling business again, And I think the enormity of one death is such an overwhelming experience. It's very hard to parse. And 5, okay. 20, it starts to become very hard to make anything of it. And 1,000 deaths is, it's incomprehensible. And I think that that's profoundly true. These photos, there are, I believe, about 600 of them that I took that are really worth seeing over this period. And I started at the age of 18. And I was already kind of infected, I nearly said, addicted to photography. And I just couldn't, I just loved photography. But also I was growing up in this crazy, nightmarish and surreal world. And so in a way I had a subject in front of me and I had this compulsion to do it. So eventually I think I reached an analysis, which probably came largely from my father, that we were living in a colonial situation. I think that's still my analysis of it, that it's a post-colonial, dead colonial situation. And I think that it actually, the whole conflict in the north was managed and controlled and, operated really by the British state. They could have stopped the violence at any time, but it suited them to do it. I have heard a British general on television bragging about how they were the only army in the world with 200 years of continuous action. But that was my hometown. It certainly left the British state very capable of dealing with unrest, and highly, highly militarised, a very huge surveillance culture, all of that high technology, and they used it. And most of the businesses in the town were Protestant owned, and they sure as hell didn't want to be in an Irish Republic. And so the border was drawn around Newry. Belfast is a completely different thing, it's very divided, but it has an amazing sectarian dynamic to it that doesn't really exist in Newry. Because Newry, I think, is like 95% Catholic. It's something like that. I think there's a dynamic that happens in Newry, the town centre, and the town is basically Catholic, 95%, but the lands around it are very, very good lands, especially on the north side, and they're all Protestant owned. And the businesses would be Protestant owned. So, but in Newry, really, people got along, I had one Protestant friend, there weren't Protestants around, so you didn't really know anything about them. You only really saw them or heard them on the 12th of July. Belfast was a revelation to me because I had never seen, on this day, I think there were maybe 200,000 orange men parading in Belfast. Until you see that, you really don't realise the power of loyalist culture. And it was quite amazing, nasty, racist sectarianism, which exists in Belfast in a really big way. There was a fascinating article with all the Titanic stuff that was going on lately in the Phoenix magazine. And it was a revelation to me and a shock to me about the Belfast shipyards, about the sectarian culture there. I think when there were like 20,000 workers in the shipyards, I think there were 190 Catholics who were only there because they had to be there. And they were, I believe, regularly killed. A hammer would be dropped. The last Catholic to be assassinated in the shipyard was in 1994, was shot in the back of the head by a loyalist paramilitary who was working there, and nobody was ever prosecuted. And the shipyards were completely closed, and really a kind of very nasty, frightening, unhappy culture, from that point of view. But again, I find that hard to relate to, until you experience it, you don't really know. When I went to art school first, I became friends with one of my first Protestants, a lovely guy his father was a member of the Black Preceptory, which is the most orange of orange, is very, very kind of slightly scary. But he was a self-confessed Buddhist at the age of 19. But he regaled us with all the tales, the stuff that he was told about Catholics. You dirty wee Catholics, he'd call us. You're work shy, and you breed like rabbits, and you're very dirty. And he had all these amazing racist myths, and that's what he was brought up with, which is really shocking, And in a way, this is what we're looking at. This is loyalist triumphalism in Belfast. And the streets were empty, apart from 200,000 orange men, and a lot of teenagers and young ones drinking. There'll be a huge amount of drink around. And it's kind of wanton and exciting and frightening. I didn't say I was Seán anyway, I said I was working for a local Protestant newspaper that I had actually taken pictures for, and that was fine, So, in a way, I was saying to my beloved girlfriend yesterday, I was a little afraid showing these pictures that I was whitewashing sectarian loyalism. But I suppose I was investigating it myself to see what it was and see who these people were. Newry on the 12th of July in the mid-80s, and it's a different thing. The Protestants, the locals, are kind of secure in themselves, and it doesn't have the sectarian thing quite so much. It really is rather more of a festival and a drinking match. To open the show the other night, I was very, very lucky to have Don Mullen, who's very eminent and very beautiful guy, actually, a really lovely guy. He wrote the book, he was president on Bloody Sunday, and he wrote the book called Eyewitness Bloody Sunday, and that caused such a snowballing furor of anger that it ended up in the Bloody Sunday inquiry and all of that business, and the truth has actually come out in the end. The soldiers were told we're going to teach these Fenians a lesson on the day, and they swapped their rifles around immediately afterwards. They knew exactly what they were doing. The no-go areas existed at that period in the late 70s in Derry and in Belfast. In Derry, more soldiers were sent in to break it than were sent to the Falklands. It was like massive, massive, massive power. There is this anxiety, at me. One of my tactics taking photographs would be just to stand there behind the camera and wait for people to do things, And that actually kind of works pretty well. Not this kind of camera. Immortalize you lot. Yeah. But I'm shooting 35mm film, of course, and I can only afford 3 or 4 rolls or 2 or 3 rolls. So every frame, I try and make it better. This whole thing, Orangism, is very big about passing on the faith. So you get a lot of kids in the outfits there, and the wee sashes and all of that thing, and it's very striking. It's, I don't know what my feelings about it are. I think that I see everybody as victims, really, and I think the whole political thing is all about power and about using identity to control. I always assumed I was Irish, but I grew up watching British television, of course. We could only get RTE very fuzzy. In 2008, I won the competition with an architect to design the memorial to the Omagh bomb, which was the first big, enormous, national-sized memorial to happen in the north, and was very, very, very fraught, and to be frank, the job nearly killed me. I spent the year waking up at 3:30 in the morning wondering how I was going to do it. And I did the thing, and it's done, but it put me back into the politics that I had kind of been ignoring. And to be frank about it, I'm just tell you this, that I studied it very, very deeply, and I believe it was an inside job done by elements in the security forces in order to finish the dissidents. Because the dissidents was like flicking a switch on them, that was the end of them. They had no support, and that was the end of it. It was done very ruthlessly to maximise the casualties, and there've never been successful prosecutions. There's the whole thing. Nuala O'Lone, who was the Northern Ireland Ombudsman, made an inquiry and pointed out all the, not just failings, but flagrant attempts to not prosecute anybody and to destroy the evidence. And Ronnie Flanagan, the head of the RUC at the time, said he would hang himself, he would kill himself, commit suicide if this was not disproved. But it's never been disproved. It's just the case. I got asked to go and talk at a thing for Mediation Northern Ireland or whatever in Belfast last year to lecture, and in the car on the way up to the guy, I said, look, I don't really want to, I don't want to bring this up, but my information is and my belief is that Omagh was an inside job. Shut the dogs in the street, no, he says.